So tonight on The Story, the dramatically different treatment of Iran by two U.S. presidents, as President Trump encourages protesters against the Iranian regime with this tweet. He wrote, "To the brave and suffering Iranian people, I have stood with you since the beginning of my presidency, and my government will continue to stand with you. We are following your protests closely. Your courage is inspiring." Iran watchers say the protests that erupted after it became clear that the Iranian forces shot down a Ukrainian plane, killing 176 people on board, are the clearest sign yet of momentum building against the regime, people even ripping down posters of Qasem Soleimani in the streets. So this is a moment in time. It can go either way, as the past clearly shows us. These are the protests in 2009. This woman, dead on the street, became a symbol of fighting for freedom in Tehran. Her name was Neda Agha Sultan. She was protesting what she and many saw as a stolen election. At the time, according to the book The Iran Wars by Jay Solomon of the Wall Street Journal, President Obama overruled advisors who wanted to support the protesters' cause, as America had done so many times in so many places like Georgia and Egypt and Ukraine. President Obama, according to this book, ultimately decided to remain silent. He ordered the CIA to sever any contacts it had developed with the Green Movement supporters. Solomon wrote, "The agency has contingency plans for supporting democratic uprisings anywhere in the world. This includes providing dissidents with communications, money, and in extreme cases, even arms." President Obama at the time was on a quest to engage the mullahs in an effort to strike a nuclear deal, which he ultimately did. Solomon also argues that Obama's reluctance to act on his red line in Syria may have also been linked to the desire to get that deal. But now we are in the present, and you have a president who's taking the opposite approach. So again, the question is, will it work? And how much support will America actually give to this movement? Iranian American and foreign policy scholar and advisor Nazi Moinian was supportive originally of the Iran deal, but now says that she thinks that President Trump, in this case, is doing the right thing. And she joins me once again now. Nazi, good to see you tonight. Thank you so much for being here. So I know that you're encouraged by President Trump's outreach to these protesters. What difference will that make in the end, and what kind of actual support would need to be provided to them in order to topple this regime?
So, excellent questions. I just want to dial this back a little bit to the context of which this is happening. We were talking before that the Iranians are very tuned into what the American presidents do. The American policymakers deal with the Iranian situation, and they look to America as a beacon of hope. Growing up in Iran, we were used to the American media, the American television presence. I grew up with Flintstones and Sesame Street. So Iran has three components. It has the Islamic component, but it also has a very vibrant Western component, and it has a Zoroastrian component. And for the American president to realize that the Iranian protesters have had enough of this. They don't want less, they don't want more, they want out. They don't want this regime to represent them. Actually, this regime does not represent the people. As I said before, this is a country with a very strongly pro-American population. Obviously, it's polarized in that sense that not everybody supports America, but you can confidently say that this is the most pro-American population, probably with the most anti-American regime in the Middle East. And President Trump realizes that. I think he instinctively realizes how the mullahs operate. Well, he wrote The Art of the Deal. He understands that empowering the Iranian people may be the answer to this dilemma. He is not willing to take a chance of sitting back and do what President Obama did back in 2009, and I think that's admirable.
Yeah. I just want to take a look at this video of students walking around the United States flag, I should say, and also the Israeli flag, and some of them walked across it and were heckled by those who were walking around it. I mean, this got a lot of attention over the weekend. Describe this scene. What do you see in this video, Nazi?
So, stepping on anything in Iran or showing the sole of your foot is not good manners. And for the regime operatives to have painted the picture of Israel and America is standard regime practice. They are telling the world we are not aligned to the ideals of the West or to Israel, or they unfortunately call it the Zionist regime, and they want the Iranian people to obey those rules. So this is at the entrance of a university. Students come and go to the classes. They normally walk on the flags. Not because they mean to walk on the flags, it's painted on the down the ground.
So it's very intentional to go around it.
Yes. So why they're going around it, they're deliberately signaling their leaders that you don't represent us. We don't want any more part of this, whatever you're doing with belligerent posturing towards America and Israel. We know, and I've said this to you before, that Iranians and Americans are natural allies. But I want to extend that a little bit further. I want to say Iranians, Israelis, and Americans are natural allies. Growing up in Iran, I remember that there were Israelis all around us during the time of the Shah. As a matter of fact, the Shah realized that he needed the technology of Israelis to combat climate change at the time. The rainfall would be less and less. And he imported about 3,000 Israeli civil engineers and agricultural engineers to teach Iranians about crop rotation, irrigation, and all of that. And it came to a point that there was one city outside of Tehran called Qazvin that they only spoke Hebrew, and the shopkeepers learned how to speak Hebrew so that they could communicate. So history is relevant, and Iran and Israel were not always enemies. There was a healthy working relationship, and my hope is that that will be restored.
Now you have students walking around the Israeli flag. I just want to play one soundbite from Nancy Pelosi, because there's a lot of the media is not giving a ton of attention to these protesters, and there's this notion that it's just because they're very upset about the plane and what happened with the plane. So just watch this, and I'd love to just sort of get your reaction.
And would it be a good thing if they brought the regime down?
Well, the protesters are protesting, as I understand it, this brand of protesters, about the fact that that plane went down.
They're calling out the regime for lying. They're saying death to Khamenei as well.
No, well, whatever it is. But the fact is this, there were protesters in the streets before against the regime. After the taking out of Soleimani, there were protesters in the street joined together, as you know, against us.
What would you say to her in your response to that answer?
I'm saddened to hear this answer. The protesters are protesting the downing of the airliner, which, by the way, whether it was intentional or unintentional, the fact of the matter is that the Iranian regime tried to cover it up, and that adds insult to injury. And the Iranian people are basically telling their leaders that not only you've been killing us, you're also trying to cover it up. And they would have continued to cover it up had the Ukrainian officials not found debris that was pierced with shrapnel. So this story would have gone on. The fact is that these protesters are continuing their anger at the regime. This was a catalyst. It brought the people out. Yeah. But people were on the streets in November. Their anger didn't subside. If anything, it's more poignant. It's more pointed. It's against the leader. They are calling the leader by his name. Yeah. They're saying Soleimani was a murderer, Khamenei is a murderer, but which rhymes in Farsi. It doesn't rhyme in English, so it's not that interesting.
But, no, but it's very interesting, and we'll see if it is, one of those potential tipping points again. And we really appreciate your insight, Nazi. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me back.
Nazi Morning, good to have you here tonight once again. So coming up, Senator.